It's beyond
Oh,
loud. Okay, there. Sorry,
there.
everybody. Go ahead, Francis.
Okay. Thanks, Bill. I got a taste of what it would be like without you because Michael's power went out and I ran the first 30 minutes of TCF by myself. And believe me, it is so much better to have somebody helping out. So, anyway, welcome to the 69th webinar on the Secret Doctrine. This webinar series is available on makara.us under the subheadings Moria Federation webinars and then webinar series in progress as shown here. All episodes of this, the Secret Teachings of All Ages, and the Treatise on Cosmic Fire series are also available on YouTube. Just do a search for Francis Donald and the webinar series you'd like to view. You can also access any of these webinars on the homepage of Moria Federation up in the upper left-hand corner. Okay, this month in Old Diary Leaves, Colonel Olcott springs from the stage where he is lecturing to attend to an audience member who has suddenly had an epileptic fit. So could we get a reader for this, please?
I'll start. I don't know why, but from Jubal or onward, I seem to be passing through a better atmosphere. The dark distrust, wavering courage, and captiousness, which had set me in the Northwest province,
I think that's right.
NWP, and which I had had to dispel, were absent from this part of my circular journey. Friendly hands were offered, kind words spoken, ears open to hear my message, and many loyal friends and well-wishers made. The government rest house at Hoshangabad is most beautiful, situated on the banks of the Narbuda River, and the scene which I stood in the bright moonlight on top of platform of the bathing hut addressed a multitude was most poetic and picturesque. Among my visitors were a number of Europeans in government employ, and they attended both of my lectures.
Okay, next up.
All right, Martha, can you read that for us, please?
Yes, I can. An even more warm welcome was given me at Nagpur, where the moving spirit was Mr. C. Narayanswamy Naidu, the principal pleader of the place. Since unfortunately deceased, but from that time onward to the last, one of the most useful, wise, and loyal members of our society. At his house, I formed the Nagpur TS with himself as president and as chairman of the monster audience, which packed the theater to hear me discourse on the Aryan rishis and Hindu philosophy. He laid over my shoulders, after the old Hindu fashion, a crimson embroidered chadar or shawl. An interesting incident which happened on that evening will be remembered by the spectators. In the midst of my discourse, there suddenly broke into the dead silence one of those raucous, uncanny cries that epileptics utter at the beginning of their seizures.
Thank you, Martha. And next up.
Vivian, can you read that for us, please?
The whole audience rose to their feet and anxiously looked towards the right, where a man stood beating the air, his face convulsed with an expression of agony, and the next moment fell to the floor. He had hardly touched the ground before I sprang from the stage, pushed my way to him, took his forehead and the nape of his neck between my hands, breathed on his face, and concentrated my will upon his disease. In less than a couple of minutes, his moaning ceased. The fit passed off. Somebody gave him a cup of water. He rose and passed out of the house. Then I climbed back to the stage and took up the thread of my argument. This simple experiment showed for the 1000th time that epilepsy, one of the most formidable of afflictions under orthodox treatment, is quite amenable to the well-directed power of the mesmeric aura. I hope it may be remembered by all who have the power and the wish to help suffering humanity.
Thank you, Vivian. We come to realize more and more how extraordinary this Colonel Olcott was. Okay, last time, and we continued with the interim chapter, additional facts and explanations concerning the globes and the monads, where we learned about the sequential unfoldment of the life wave. Remember? What happens at the commencement of round one of each chain. Successive groups of monads established themselves at that time. So let's do a quick review of the material we covered. So first, the mineral kingdom moves from a state of pralaya of the previous chain to once again establish itself on globe A of the new chain. Then, when the way has been prepared by the mineral kingdom for the next kingdom, the vegetable, the beings associated with establishing the presence of the mineral kingdom on globe A move on to globe B. There's still a mineral kingdom on globe A, which will substand and provide nourishment for all the kingdoms which follow on globe A, and even eventually establish the human kingdom. But the Davic forces that establish the mineral kingdom will move on to globe B. Then the mineral life impulse moves on to globe C as the life impulse of the vegetable kingdom establishes itself on globe B, and the life impulse of the animal kingdom is initiated on globe A. Then the life impulse of the three lower kingdoms move on to their next successive globes as the life impulse of the human kingdom establishes itself on globe A. Next, all four kingdoms move on to the next successive globe, and globe A goes into pralaya until the next round. If this pattern holds, then the next migration looks like this, with globe B going into pralaya, and the next like this, with globe A, B, and C in pralaya. Then the kingdoms successively move into a round pralaya, the pralaya of the first round, before the commencement of the second round. When we learned about they successfully move into pralaya in this way until they're all in pralaya, and the first round is now also in pralaya. So everything is frozen in situ before the mineral kingdom begins its reformulation on the same globe A as in the first round, but now at a higher level of impulse. And also, since it's involutional, it would be also at a more dense level, dealing with different set of elements. We then learned about the closing of the door into the human kingdom at the midpoint of the fourth globe of the fourth round. It just happened during the Atlantean race, which marks the exact midpoint for the entire Earth scheme. We then took a look at the elemental kingdoms, shown here. The first of 4 stages of passage into the fifth kingdom. The latter comprised of 3 superhuman levels, giving a total of 10 kingdoms and thus aligning with the 10 Sephiroth of the Tree of Life. So you have 3 elemental kingdoms here, 3 superhuman kingdoms here, and then you have the 4 physical kingdoms that we're aware of, the mineral, vegetable, and animal and human kingdoms. We finished by taking an in-depth look at this diagram from 5 Years of Theosophy, which illustrates the descent into matter and the reascent into the spirit by means of the 7 or 10 kingdoms of nature. So this is I think, a very cool conceptual chart. It just shows the matrix of the one monad, which pre-exists this matrix and exists afterwards. So the monad issues forth the elemental kingdoms, which go into ever dense matter. Spirit descends into matter until it reaches this middle fulcrum point, the mineral kingdom, right? And then from this point on, form gradually dissipates. That is to say, the influence of the form aspect is densest in the mineral and gradually loses its hold on the indwelling jiva. And at the same time, of course, you have the reascension of spirit. And these 3 numbers here represent the human, animal, and plant kingdoms, right? So, and then finally, through the superhuman evolution of the human kingdom, one reemerges into the universal monad, but now also with self-awareness and self-consciousness. So that's it's a unique chart, and I haven't seen anything quite like it. So this is just, we went through this at the very end of our last time together, and it literally describes it point by point, right, of this process. Okay. I see a hand already. Good.
Yes, Gordon, go ahead.
Yes, last time there was questions about the elemental kingdoms and what they comprise. And I had remembered I'd seen things written in Annie Besant's book, A Study in Consciousness, about that. So she says they are comprised of the elemental essence of each of those kingdoms. And that is what is on the involutionary arc.
Mm-hmm.
Then later she talks a little bit about devas, and she said in Sanskrit they're called devas, but in Christian and Muslim they're called angels and archangels.
Mm-hmm.
And to avoid sectarian connotations, theosophists have called them elementals. And
Well, yeah, they belong to the same kingdom, but they're not at the same stature. So elementals are of a lower level of evolution than the Deva kingdoms. The Devas use these elemental essences to build the form aspect of the kingdoms that we're familiar with, right? The physical kingdoms.
She said in the book that Theosophists has used the term elemental to refer to devas because their bodies are composed of the elemental essence, and they use that elemental essence to form other things. And she refers to them on the evolutionary arc. And that was part of the question last time of which is on the involutionary and which is on the evolutionary arc.
Yeah, well, the Deva kingdom, which includes the elemental kingdom, the DK divides them into elementals and devas, and the devas are of a higher stature, And there's, of course, many, many grades of devas as well, including, what Christians call the archangels, which would be, for instance, the deva lords of an entire plane, would be definitely super conscious beings. And at their far other end of the pole, you would have these elemental kingdoms who are really the first differentiated forms, preforms really, made of the atomic matter of the monastic plane, and then the four lower subplanes of the monastic plane, then the astral, right? But since they're on an involutionary arc, they don't have the consciousness of those planes. That's just where they exist. And then later the or the higher levels of these elemental kingdoms is the entire Deva kingdom. And DK doesn't give us super strict delineations, though in a treatise on cosmic fire, he describes the nature of the different elementals, such as salamanders and gnomes and fairies and that type of thing, which are just less precise words given to these the members of these kingdoms.
Okay. Last time there seemed to be a question about whether the gnomes and fairies were actually on the involutionary arc or the evolutionary arc. And that's what I'm trying to address here.
Right.
I think these three elemental kingdoms, when you're talking about them on the involutionary arc, that includes only the elemental essence
I
itself.
believe that's correct. Now, I haven't really reconciled this either. But this, in the hierarchies are considered the breadbasket from which is drawn the substantive aspect of the other kingdoms. So that's what's called the elemental essence, right? Which in this chart is here, these three groups, right? Really, it's the first response to this matrix, which draws the life aspect into form, right? So it's that first level of that. But see, as soon as if this doesn't deal with it, it would be interesting if it did. It would be great to have a chart that had more names, because then we could get a sense of just how the devas also delineate in this matrix, because there's going to be devas that belong to all these evolutional stages as well, right? But I don't have that information at my fingertips. We were looking.
Well, I have a quote from Treatise on Cosmic Fire. I had also been reading about the Deva part in here, and I came across this. So I'd like to read a short section of it.
Sure, that's fine.
This is on page 890, Treatise on Cosmic Fire. It says, therefore, in connection with manifestation on the physical plane, the devas may be divided into three groups. One, the transmitters of the will of God, the originators of activity in deva substance. These are the greater builders in their various groups. Two, the manipulators of the initiated energy. These are the myriads of workers with force who transmit the impulse in their turn to the elemental essence.
Mm-hmm.
They are the builders of lesser degree, but are on the evolutionary arc, as are the first group. Three, the recipients of force, the sum total of the living substance of a plane. These lives are passive in the hands of the builders of greater degree. And then later he goes on to mention nature spirits
Right.
undines, salamanders, and he refers all of those to this group 2, manipulators of energy, and those are all on the evolutionary arc.
Hmm. Okay, that tells us quite a bit. There's a um, let me see if I can open it here to go out of. So, get this in here. Hold on just a sec. That should work. Okay, so here's the 12 creative hierarchies. What you've been talking about are down here, these lowest hierarchies, right? Which are the greater builders and the lesser builders, as you see here, right? And they are the sixth and seventh hierarchy of sixth and seventh hierarchy of this solar system, and yet they are still in the evolutionary path, and they work with. See, they're called elemental lives and the lesser builders. So you wonder where the delineation is. There's also a stage. Where is it? Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah, here. There's also a stage called the refuge of that which was earlier seen, right? Which is not a hierarchy per se, but it's this group that make up the physical substance, not the etheric, but the literal physical substance of the entire manifested universe. And that is manipulated by the greater and lesser builders. So this is a parallel system. You don't have, this doesn't absolutely answer the question of which, I mean, we know that these are evolutionary, and that this, but where those three elemental kingdoms that are described in the other chart fit in terms of I mean, we know they're involutional, but it's really the question of just where the dividing line is and how that dividing line interacts. Like I said, what we really need is let me get back on point here. What we need is a further description in a chart, something like this, that shows the Deva evolution in terms of involution and evolution to get a more precise understanding. But thanks for that information. That's interesting. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else? Are we good?
Yeah, okay. So I pasted the passage that Gordon mentioned in
The chat?
the chat.
Great.
Yeah. The reference that he gave and then what he read. And then Catherine says, is this reference to the refuse a reference to the visible world, i.e., what has already been created?
Well, I was talking about the last solar system. They're a vestige, that group, which is below even the seventh hierarchy, or considered the failures of the last solar system, and their lot in life is to act as the physical substance of the this universe, all manifestations of this universe, not the etheric substance, but the physical substance. So, yeah, they're from they're considered the failures of the previous solar system. Anyone else? Okay, so we finished. Let's see here. So that's where we left off last time. We kind of raced through this chart, but I don't think it's necessary that we revisit it. As long as you get a general understanding of this. If you want to take a closer look, you can always go back to one of the recorded Secret Doctrine episodes like this one and reread this and take a closer look at it. So we need a reader for this next section.
Gordon, can you read that for us, please?
Yes. Now, what is a monad, and what relation does it bear to an atom? The following reply is based upon the explanations given in the answer to these questions in the above cited article, The Mineral Monad, written by the author. None whatever is answered to the second question, to the atom or molecule as existing in the scientific conception at present. It can neither be compared with a microscopic organism once classed among polyglastic infusoria and now regarded as vegetable and classed among algae, nor is it quite the monads of the periapatetics. Physically or constitutionally, the mineral monad differs, of course, from the human monad, which is neither physical nor can its constitution be rendered by chemical symbols and elements. In short, as the spiritual monad is one, universal, boundless, and impartite, whose rays nevertheless form what we, in our ignorance, call individual monads of men, so the mineral monad, being at the opposite point of the circle, is also one, and from it proceed the countless physical atoms which science is beginning to regard as individualized.
Okay. So first, now what is a monad and what relation does it bear to an atom? Then skipping down a bit, none whatever is answered to the second question. To the atom or molecule as existing in the scientific conception at present. So the atoms and molecules of science, including microscopic organism, algae, etc., are not to be confused with a monad, or HPB implies, even to an atom with a capital A, which DK calls an atom of substance. The atom of science is defined by its physical characteristics, the atom of substance by the fact that it has an indwelling jiva. It's the smallest unit of consciousness, individual awareness, right? And is thus a unit of consciousness. Okay, so there's an important difference there. One is a subjective, one is an objective physical reality. Next, nor is it quite the monas of the peripatetics. This is because the peripatetics applied the word monas to the whole cosmos, whereas HPB era theosophists distinguish progressive stages of evolution in terms of successive monads, as shown here. In the white, you'll see a series of monads, starting the divine monad, which is described as monadic essence, which means there's no form associated with it. The spiritual monad, which is the Jivatman is the vehicle of the divine monad or monadic essence. And then you have two levels of monastic monads, the higher human monad, the lower human monad. Then you have the kama, which is the beast monad, which means animal man, astrophysical monad at the lowest level here. So even HPB theosophy recognizes that these are not true, they're not truly the monad, that the universal monad is the only true monad, because if anything separate from that is inherently not one, not monadic. That's what monad means. And therefore it's used as a convenience to describe these stages. Yeah. Next up, physically or constitutionally, the mineral monad differs, of course, from the human monad, which is neither physical nor can its constitution be rendered by chemical symbols and elements. Quoting from her 5 Years of Theosophy on the next page of the Secret Doctrine, and we'll be back here in just a minute, HPB states, instead of saying mineral monad, the more correct phraseology would be to call it the monad manifesting in that form of prakriti called the mineral kingdom. So I hope you get the distinction here. The idea is that the monad is universal, and its manifestation happens in these various stages that described in that chart that I showed earlier, right? But rather than thinking of it as these separate monads of any given kingdom, and we're going to be talking more about this. In fact, let's finish.
Okay, hold on. Question.
Yeah.
And Veronica asks, could these represent the permanent atoms?
There is, I see your point. There's a relationship in that each is a nexus of fundamental energy. But the permanent atoms, the purpose of those nexus is to reestablish the quality of each successive incarnations, and they have if you look at the HPB method of monadic constitution, you could call them monadic in this sense of the word, but not in the DK sense of the word, where the monad, sends out the soul, which sends out the personality. It's the essential undifferentiated self, whereas permanent atoms are inherently differentiated into the physical permanent atom, astral permanent atom, mental unit, monastic permanent atom, etc., all the way up. Each has its own quality of the nature of the energy of the nexus that it represents, right? Okay, so yeah, let's go ahead, and this will help a bit in terms of the understanding of the of this concept we've been talking about, especially the mineral atom. Could we get a reader, please?
Dot, can you read that for us, please?
Each atom or molecule of ordinary scientific hypotheses is not animated by a psychic something destined to blossom as a man after eons, but it is a concrete manifestation of the universal energy, which itself has not yet become individualized. A sequential manifestation of the one universal monas. The ocean does not divide into its potential and constituent drops until the sweep of the life impulse reaches the evolutionary stage of man birth. The tendency towards segregation into individual monads is gradual, and in the higher animal comes almost to the point. The term monad merely means that the tidal wave of spiritual evolution is passing through that arc of its circuit. The monadic essence begins to imperceptibly differentiate in the vegetable kingdom. As the monads are uncompounded things, as correctly defined by Leibniz, It is the spiritual essence which vivifies them in their degrees of differentiation, which constitutes properly the monad, not the atomic aggregation, which is only the vehicle and the substance through which thrill the lower and higher degrees of intelligence.
Thank you, Scott. So this passage, it is a complete manifestation of the universal energy, which itself has not yet become individualized. A sequential manifestation of the one universal monads. And then he goes on to say, this is an important part. The ocean does not divide into its potential and constituent drops until the sweep of the life impulse reaches the evolutionary stage of man birth. So this is a key theosophical tenet. The idea of one monad for each manifested entity does not occur until the life wave reaches the human stage. That's why it's incorrect to think of, for instance, a mineral monad as belonging to a mineral unit, right? Besides, how are you going to determine what a mineral unit is anyway? You could say that it's only at this stage that the universal monad is beginning to differentiate. It informs the entire mineral kingdom, but it's not until the plant kingdom that tendency towards differentiating into individual monads takes place and it's almost realized at the point of higher animal and isn't fully realized until the human. I see a hand.
Tom, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
This is a difficult passage to understand because I understand the universal monads is something like the universal monad, the one. And then we have the sparks that would be, I would call them individual monads. And this says that the ocean does not divide into its potential and constituent drops until it reaches the stage of man birth. I don't quite, I understand that when man is birthed, the individuality of those drops are constituted because that's the purpose of the human stage. But before that, we have all these elementals, it's called the elemental essence, but that implies somehow that the monads, the sparks have already been separated in some way. So I wouldn't read it so that only when the man comes, then we suddenly have separate individual monads.
Right, but it's not a sudden shift. This sentence, the tendency towards segregation into individual monads is gradual.
Yes.
Yeah, it's an important aspect. And in the higher animals almost comes to the point. This is really a really important passage. There's no part of it that is superficial. The term monad merely means that the tidal wave of spiritual evolution is passing through the arc of its circuit, and that's what's being described here, right? So, even in what I get from this is that even the human monad is really a reflection into singularity of the universal monad, and the human monadic group. And DK is very specific about this. He says there's 65 billion monads. I think that's the number. 25 million third ray, 35 million second ray, and 5 million first ray. I think that's the breakdown. Billion, I said million, I meant billion monads. So, that's very specific. And yet they all belong to a group that is we call the planetary logos. It's a center in the planetary planetary logos, right? So that, and even that, you could say, is a separated out form of the truly universal monads, which would only exist and in the unmanifested levels at the highest levels of the cosmic planes, right? Because any differentiation takes you out of that pure universal monads. But all of the differentiations are representatives, or you could say informed by that universal monads, right? But then you have, in addition to that, you have this particular teaching here where this quality of a separated monad is part of the evolutionary path, because it begins here and increases really at the second kingdom, the plant kingdom, and increases until it manifests through the human kingdom, you know.
Yeah, I think that I have read the Hylozoitic or Pythagorean version or definition of the monad. It's clearer to me and a little bit different, because it says, I don't know if it's different, but somehow it makes sense that in that doctrine, the monads are the many that come from the one, and this is their journey, and they are actually the building blocks of the whole universe. They are at the same time the material base that are gradually through this whole cycle of manifestation to become conscious, individualized, self-conscious, and then universally conscious. So I think that's a little bit clearer way to think that what is written here. But
Yeah,
who am I to say?
yeah, it's ultimately it's the informing essence. The monadic essence is you could say it's the, DK calls it the life aspect, right? The spark, and that the spark is only apparently separated from the fire, or the drop is only apparently separated from the ocean. And that apparent separation is created through perceptions, right? It's the fact that we perceive, which in that determines the nature of our consciousness. And it's that perceptive mechanism that creates the sense of separation. But inherently, it's not separate.
Yeah. But
Inherently,
to create the universe, it has to think so.
it has to think so. Yeah. Good way to
That's
put it.
good.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Okay, so next, let me find my place here. As to the here cited human monad, again, this is not the monad on the monadic plane of DK theosophy, because it's HPB era theosophy, right? But can refer to either the two-stage higher and lower human monads, they're literally called human monads, on monastic levels, or to its higher counterpart, the Jivatman or spiritual monad. This passage helps clarify the difference. Can we get a reader, please?
Yes, and Parker, can you read that for us, please?
Sure. The monad is the combination of the last two principles in man, the sixth and the seventh. And properly speaking, the term human monad applies only to the spiritual soul, not to its highest spiritual vivifying principle. But since divorced from the latter, the spiritual soul could have no existence, no being. It has thus been called. The composition of Buddhi, or the sixth principle, is made up of the essence of what you would call matter, or perchance a center of spiritual force in its sixth and seventh condition or state, the animating Atman being part of the one life or Parabrahm.
Okay, so what she's saying here is that the spiritual monad could and would have no existence without the monadic essence. This is the highest vehicle, buddhi, of the informing life principle, right? So even though this is often called the monad, it's really the two together that form what in HPB era theosophy was called the monad or the highest monad. Next. In short, as the spiritual monad is one, universal, boundless, and impartite, whose rays nevertheless form what we in our ignorance call the individual monads of men, right? This is a phrase. Impartite means indivisible. So because the spiritual monad is one, the term individual monad is an oxymoron and actually refers to the sheath or quote unquote monadic envelope as described in the passage we just read. And that helps reconcile the difference. You know, you have a monadic sheath on various levels including animal kingdom monads, etc. And then you have the monadic essence, which pervades all. Next up. So the mineral monad, being at the opposite point of the circle, is also one. And from it proceed the countless physical atoms, which science is beginning to regard as individualized. So the mineral monad is at the opposite point of the circle of the evolutional kingdoms, where the birth of the physical atoms begins, right? Conversely, it is the central point of the entire evolutional matrix, which includes the elemental kingdoms, right? But it's that point that initiates the existence of physical atoms, because in the elemental groups here to the right, you don't have that individuated physicality, right? It's not until the mineral kingdom. And then the next stage would be, then the next stage would occur here, where you have that sense of the individual monadic sheath beginning to take form, and which finally fully occurs in a human being. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Yes. And Veronica, can you read that for us, please?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Otherwise, how could one account for and explain mathematically the evolutionary and spiral progress of the four kingdoms? The monad is a combination of the last two principles in man, the sixth and the seventh, and properly speaking, the term human monad applies only to the dual soul, Atma Buddhi, not to its higher spiritual vivifying principle, Atma alone. But since the spiritual soul, if divorced from the latter, Atma, could have no existence, no being, it has thus been called, now the monadic, or rather cosmic essence, if such a term be permitted, in the mineral, vegetable, and animal, though the same throughout the series of cycles from the lowest elemental up to the Deva kingdom, yet differs in the scale of progression. It would be very misleading to imagine a monad as a separate entity trailing its slow way in a distinct path through the lower kingdoms, and after an incalculable series of transformation, flowering into a human being. In short, that the monad of a Humboldt dates back to the monad of an atom of a hornblende. Instead of saying a mineral monad, the more correct phraseology in physical science, which differentiate every atom, would of course have been to call it the monad manifestating in form of prakriti, called the mineral kingdom.
Thank you, Aunt Veronica. So in the first part of this, she closely paraphrases her 5 years of theosophy article on the mineral monad. That's why it sounded so familiar. It's very close to what we just read. Okay, so first up, otherwise, how could one account for and explain mathematically the evolutionary and spiral progress of the four kingdoms? Well, first of all, good luck on explaining it mathematically, unless you're a high fifth ray initiate. So HPB here suggests if every grain of sand, every infinitesimal speck was ultimately a separate monad, what force would impel them to participate in evolution? It is only the fact that they are one with the universal monad that gives them the inherent impetus to evolve, to pass through the incarnational matrix, and thus participate in the quote unquote evolutionary and spiral progress of the four kingdoms. Indeed, if they truly were monads in and of themselves, they would have reached their goal by being what they are, right? And the fact that they participate in the sweep of evolution shows that they are part of the universal monad. This next passage, which we read earlier, is taken from 5 years of theosophy, but I think it bears repeating. The monad is the combination of the last two principles in man, the sixth and seventh, and properly speaking, the term human monad applies only to the dual soul, Atma Buddhi, not to its higher spiritual vivifying principle, Atma alone. But since the spiritual soul, if divorced from the latter, Atma, could have no existence, no being, it has to be called, okay, so then the sentence just stops. As mentioned before, the qualifying term human monad can either be referred to the monastic monad, which is properly called, as you can see here, the human monad, or to the sheath through which the universal monadic essence expresses itself. But both Atman and Jiva must be included, because without the monadic essence, there would be no life, no be-ness to animate the Jivatman. And with, So next, now the monadic, or rather cosmic essence, if such a term may be permitted, in the spiritual, vegetable, and animal, though the same throughout the series of cycles from the lowest elemental to the Deva kingdom, yet differs in the scale of progression. So, though the universal monad remains ever the same, there are apparent differences due to the illusion of time and space, an illusion which demonstrates as a, quote, series of cycles from the lowest elemental up to the Deva kingdom. And we might add, from those same or parallel elemental kingdoms up through the human kingdom, because there's two parallel evolutional groups, the Deva and the human, that partake of this matrix. Next, it would be very misleading to imagine a monad as a separate entity trailing its slow way in a distinct path through the lower kingdoms, and after an incalculable series of transformations, flowering into a human being. In short, that a monad of a Humboldt dates back to the monad of an atom of hornblende. Okay. Hornblende is a mineral. some light humor here, suggesting the absurdity of an atom of matter as described by science, right? A matter of this rock called hornblende, becoming a human monad, the human monad of Alexander von Humboldt, right? Okay, then next up, instead of saying a mineral monad, a more correct phraseology in physical science, which differentiates every atom, I quoted this earlier, would of course have been to call it the monad manifesting in that form of prakriti called the mineral kingdom. So any monads that are not the universal monads are the vehicle of that monad at some stage of progression through the kingdoms. Prakriti is the first differentiated stage of Mula Prakriti, which is the undifferentiated essence of substance. Just as a human monad is actually referencing the Jivatman or highest sheath of a human being, so a mineral monad is referencing Prakriti in its mineral yet still noumenal stage. Neither HPB here suggests are actually monadic, but are described as monads for convenience sake. Okay, next up, and I might just end this by saying that the DK simplifies it, makes it much easier by describing what are called the various levels of monads. He calls them sheaths, and are representatives of the form aspect on the various levels of the cosmic physical plane, and then he uses the term monad purely for that true self aspect, which exists only on the monadic plane. I think it's a clearer way, though there's not philosophically much difference, mostly just in perspective and semantics. But I think it is an easier way to understand it. Anyway, can we get a reader, please?
Yes, Janet, can you read that for us, please?
The atom, as represented in the ordinary scientific hypothesis, is not a particle of something animated by a psychic something, destined after eons to blossom as a man. But it is a concrete manifestation of the universal energy, which itself has not yet become individualized. A sequential manifestation of the one universal manas. The ocean of matter does not divide into its potential and constituent drops until the sweep of the life impulse reaches the evolutionary stage of man birth. The tendency towards segregation into individual monads is gradual, and in the higher animals comes almost to a point. The Peripathetics applied the word monas to the whole cosmos, in the pathetic sense and the occultist, while accepting this thought for convenience sake, distinguish the progressive stages of the evolution of the concrete from the abstract, in terms of which the mineral, vegetable, animal, etc. monad are examples. The term merely means the tidal wave of spiritual evolution is passing through the arc of its circuit. The monadic essence begins to imperceptibly differentiate towards individual consciousness in the vegetable kingdom. As the monads are uncompounded things, as correctly defined by Leibniz, it is the spiritual essence which vivifies them in their degree of differentiation, which properly constitutes the monad, not the atomic aggregation. which is only the vehicle and the substance through which thrill the lower and higher degrees of intelligence.
Okay, so this is, again, we find material drawn from, but not identical to, the earlier published 5 Years of Theosophy. So a bit of patience. There's some repetition here, which, repetition is a good thing. Hopefully it'll make things a bit clearer, including this analysis. So first up, the atom as represented in the ordinary scientific hypothesis is not a particle of something animated by a psychic something destined after eons to blossom as a man. Let's continue. We've gone over this idea with the Hornblende becoming the Humboldt. But it is a concrete manifestation of universal energy, which itself has not yet become individualized, a sequential manifestation of the one universal monas. So the atom of science manifesting in time and space represents an arrested moment or snapshot of the sequential manifestation of the one universal monad. Next, the ocean of matter does not divide itself into its potential and constituent drops until the sweep of the life impulse reaches the evolutionary stage of man birth. The stage of man birth is differentiated by individualization, and though not here mentioned by HPB, by the acquiescence of the soul to oversee the now human indwelling jiva, so as to gradually develop manas. Next, the tendency towards segregation into individual monads is gradual, and in the higher animals comes almost to the point. So rather than abruptly occurring at individualization, HPB here suggests that during the latter part of the second half of the matrix of incarnation, there is a gradual, quote, tendency towards segregation into individual monads. Next, the Peripatetics applied the word monas to the whole cosmos in the pantheistic sense, and the occultists, while accepting this thought for convenience sake, distinguish the progressive stages of the evolution of the concrete from the abstract by terms of which the mineral, vegetable, animal, etc., monad are examples. Okay, the Peripatetics, who were students of Aristotle, considered the entire manifested universe as monas, indivisible, unified monas. HPB era theosophy acknowledges this concept, but chooses to distinguish progressive stages with the term monad for convenience sake. Modern theosophy prefers the term kingdom of nature for such groupings. Next, the term monad merely means that the tidal wave of spiritual evolution is passing through that arc of its circuit. So the monadic essence begins to imperceptibly differentiate towards individual consciousness in the vegetable kingdom. Okay, it's during the vegetable kingdom that a gradual differentiation of consciousness begins to unfold. We have to, what does that look like? We have to ask, it seems like the kind of thing that either is individualized or isn't. But the idea that it's an influence towards differentiation as opposed to an absolutely homogeneous participation in monas on one side or one end, and the individualized monadic sheaths in humankind. You have this stage of where the influence of this individualization is beginning to exert itself. Next, as the monads are uncompounded things, as correctly defined by Leibniz, it is the spiritual essence which vivifies them in their degrees of differentiation, which properly constitutes the monad, not the atomic aggregation, which is only the vehicle and the substance through which thrill the lower and the higher degrees of intelligence. So it is the quote unquote uncompounded essence, or the true monad, that vivifies all lower divisions while remaining untouched and unaffected by the congeries of physical atoms that make up the form aspect. Okay, next up, could we get a reader, please?
Yes, Magda, can you read that for us, please? Oops, looks like she's gone. Okay. Tom, can you read that for us, please?
Yes, if my connection is good. Leibniz conceived of the monads as elementary and indestructible units endowed with the power of giving and receiving with respect to other units, and thus of determining all spiritual and physical phenomena. It is he who invented the term perception, which together with nerve, not perception, but rather sensation, expresses the state of the monadic consciousness through all the kingdoms up to man. Thus it may be wrong to strictly metaphysical lines to call Atma Buddhi a monad, since in the materialistic view it's dual and therefore compound. But as matter is spirit and vice versa, and since the universe and the deity which informs it are unthinkable apart from each other, so in the case of Atma Buddhi, the latter being the vehicle of the former, Buddhi stands in the same relation to Atma as Adam Kadmon, the Kabbalistic Logos, does to Ein Sof or Mula Prakriti to Parabra.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, first, Leibniz conceived of the monads as elementary and indestructible units, endowed with the power of giving and receiving with respect to other units, and thus of determining all spiritual and physical phenomena. Okay, Leibniz believed that there was one universal indivisible element, or in his words, simple substance. That would be the Mula Prakriti of the Hindus, which he called the monad, that single substance, and which is, without himself using the term, akin to the Mula Prakriti of Hindu philosophy. However, just as in theosophy, Leibniz believed that once manifested, there are differences in perfection between various stages of manifestation, which lead to a hierarchical ordering, but that the trend that exists through the evolutional process is to return finally to that universal indivisible substance. It's interesting too that he says that these units are endowed with the power of giving and receiving, he says here, right? And it's through that aspect that physical phenomena is able to take place. It's through the fact of their interaction, these elementary indestructible units, that manifestation takes place. Okay, next up. It is he who invented the term apperception, which together with nerve, not perception, but rather sensation, expresses the state of the monadic consciousness through all the kingdoms up to man. Apperception normally means fully conscious perception specifically of the oneness of that which is being perceived with its constituent parts, right? So the understanding of the constituent parts as being intrinsically unified, that awareness is called apperception. This leads to a wise understanding of cause and effect. But when applied to the lower kingdoms, apperception refers to the unitive quality of instinctual consciousness. Instinctual consciousness. Therefore, it can be said that the monad expresses itself through the lower kingdoms by means of unitive instinctual consciousness, as well as this this idea of nerve, not perception, but rather sensation. Okay, this next passage reviews what has been repeatedly stated. The monad, at least as defined by HPB era theosophists, is a combination of monadic essence and the highest vehicle through which that essence manifests. And finally, the latter being the vehicle of the former, Buddhi stands in the same relation to Atma, or Adam Kadmon. The Kabbalistic logos does, let me say this again. Buddhi stands in the same relation to Atma as Adam Kadmon, the Kabbalistic logos, does to En Sof, or Mula Prakriti to Parabrahm. So Ein Sof is a three-stage Kabbalistic term for the formless realms. Let's read this Theosophical Glossary definition for Adam Kadmon. Can we get a reader, please?
Catherine, can you read that, please? Catherine? I don't see her unmuting. So Marguerite, can you read that for us, please? Okay, can you guys hear me? Nobody's unmuting.
I'm hearing you.
Okay.
I heard somebody.
Martha,
I,
Martha,
can you hear me? I'm
Oh,
sorry.
there we go. There's Marguerite.
Oh, okay.
Okay,
I
please.
couldn't unmute. I'm sorry. Okay. Adam Kadmon, Hebrew. Adam Kadmon, Adam mankind plus Kadmon to be before precede. Primordial man, Adam primus in the Kabbalah, microscopic man in contrast to the earthly Adam. The microcosm, often called the heavenly man, because symbolically he is the Seraphim. Thank you. Tree of life, each of the Sephiroth having its correspondence with the part of the body, the head being Kether, crown, and the feet standing for Malkuth, kingdom. Adam Kadmon corresponds mystically to the Hindu Purusha. Both are generalizing terms used to represent the cosmic logos or hierarch of their respective hierarchies. The Blavatsky compared Adam Kadmon to the first Manu, Svayambhuva, the synthesis of the 14 Manus, also to the Greek Prometheus and the divine commander of the Hermetica, the power of the thought divine in its most spiritual aspect, Isis unveiled.
Thank you. Okay. Hang on a second. So, Ein Sof is the numeral source of Adam Kadmon, which is the sum total of differentiated manifestation, especially that having to do with human manifestation, all stages from the literal physical to the highest numeral levels of human existence. Okay, next up, can we get a reader, please?
Yes, Martha, can you read that for us, please?
Yes, I can. a few words more of the moon. What, it may be asked, are the lunar monads just spoken of? The description of the 7 classes of Petries will come later, but now some general explanations may be given. It must be plain to everyone that they are monads who, having ended their life cycle on the lunar chain, which is inferior to the terrestrial chain, have incarnated on this one. But there are some further details which may be added, though they border too closely on forbidden ground to be treated of fully. The last word of the mystery is divulged only to the adepts, but it may be stated that our satellite is only the gross body of its invisible principles. Seeing then that there are 7 earths, so there are 7 moons, the last one alone being visible. The same for the sun, whose visible body is called a Maya, a reflection, just as man's body is. Quote, the real sun and the real moon are as invisible as the real man, says an occult maxim.
So thank you, Martha.
Mhm.
All of this reviews HPB's earlier teachings on the monadic life waves that successively pass from one chain to the next, and then from globe to globe. These monadic life waves are called lunar Petries, or monads, when referring to that group that first inhabited the Earth chain after becoming human monads on the moon chain. The reference to the 7 Earths is, of course, globe A through G of the Earth chain, 7 globes, just as the 7 moons are to the globes A and G of the moon chain, with globe D being the visible, now dead moon. HPB then extends the idea of numinal globes to the sun, which includes the physical sun, the heart of the sun, and the central spiritual sun. Any thoughts or questions, further thoughts or questions on this? Much of it is review. Okay, next up, reader, please. We're kind of racing through this material. A lot of it is repeated 2 or 3 times. And so, repetition never hurts, but we don't have to go through these repetitions line by line either. Reader, please.
Vivian, can you read that for us, please?
And it may be remarked en passant that those ancients were not so foolish after all who first started the idea of the 7 moons. For though this conception is now taken solely as an astronomical measure of time, in a very materialized form, yet underlying the husk, there can still be recognized the traces of a profoundly philosophical idea. In reality, the moon is only the satellite of the Earth in one respect, viz., that physically the moon revolves round the Earth, but in every other respect it is the Earth which is the satellite of the moon, and not vice versa. Startling as the statement may seem, it is not without confirmation from scientific knowledge. It is evidenced by the tides, by the cyclic changes in many forms of disease, which coincide with the lunar phases. It can be traced in the growth of plants and is very marked in the phenomena of human gestation and conception. The importance of the moon and its influence on the earth were recognized in every ancient religion, notably the Jewish, and have been remarked by many observers of psychical and physical phenomena. But so far as science knows, the Earth's action on the moon is confined to the physical attraction which causes her to circle in her orbit. And should an objector insist that this fact alone is insufficient evidence that the moon is truly the Earth's satellite on other planes of action, one may reply by asking whether a mother who walks round and round her child's cradle, keeping watch over the infant, is the subordinate of her child or dependent upon it. Though in one sense she is its satellite, yet she is certainly older and more fully developed than the child she watches.
Thank you, Vivian. Okay, so this first passage suggests that the term 7 moons, which is now used as a measure of time, as in 7 lunar cycles, originated as a description of the moon chain. Next, the passage confirming the influence of the moon on all the kingdoms of nature, suggesting that this is due to the fact that the moon is parent to our Earth. And finally, another passage arguing for the parent-child relationship between the moon and the Earth. I'm not going into this in detail because we have covered, there was a whole section on the relationship, the causal relationship between the Earth and the moon a while back. And finally, another passage arguing for the, So next up, could we get a reader, please?
Okay, I'll read. It is then the moon that plays the largest and most important part as well in the formation of the earth itself as in the peopling thereof and human beings. The lunar monads or Petries, the ancestors of man, became in reality man himself. They are the monads who enter on the cycle of evolution on globe A and who, passing around the chain of planets, evolved the human form as has just been shown. At the beginning of the human stage of the 4th round on this globe, they ooze out their ancestral doubles from the ape-like forms which they had evolved in round 3. And it is this subtle, finer form which serves as the model round which nature builds physical man. These monads, or divine sparks, are thus the lunar ancestors, the Petries themselves. For these lunar spirits have to become men in order that their monads may reach a higher plane of activity and self-consciousness, i.e., plane of the monastic Putras, those who endowed the senseless shells created and informed by the Petries with mind in the later part of the 3rd true race. In the same way, the monads or egos of the men of the 7th round of our Earth, after our own globes A, B, C, D, etc., I guess, parting with their life energy, will have informed and therefore called to life other Laya creatures designed to live and act on a still higher plane of being. In the same way, will the terrene ancestors create those who will become their superiors.
Thank you, Bial. So first, it is then the moon that plays the largest and most important part, as well as the formation of the earth itself, as in the peopling thereof with human beings. A couple of points. As globe D, the previous chain, the moon was the numinal progenitor of our earth. It set the blueprint by which the earth would be derived from, even though it's not physically the progenitor. It's the pattern on which it was derived, which is, as we know, the earth, which is, so the moon was the numinal progenitor of our earth, which is, as we know, globe D of this earth chain. They're parallel globe Ds, one from the previous chain and the earth from this chain. Second, the stage of the greatest density on the moon chain, which took place on the globe D, directly influenced the dense physical nature of both its and our humanity for the same reasons it set a template from which our humanity was derived. Next, the lunar monads, or Petries, the ancestors of man, become in reality man himself. They are the monads who enter on the cycle of evolution on globe A, who, passing round the chain of planets, evolve the human form as has just been shown. So this is a spot review of earlier material presented in more detail. The lunar monad, or Petries, were the first wave of monads that recapitulated the lower three kingdoms on globe A of each chain, eventually re-becoming humanity on that globe. This set up a kind of blueprint or matrix of the form aspect for the monadic life waves that followed to come in to inhabit the second, third, and fourth monadic life waves. Next, at the beginning of the human stage of the fourth round on this globe, they quote unquote ooze out their astral doubles from the ape-like forms which they had evolved in round 3. And it is this subtle, finer form which serves as the model round which nature builds physical man. This is a new teaching here. First, note that HPB has shifted time frames from the previous chain to the third and fourth rounds of this chain. Next, an astral double is the etheric body, which we're here told precipitated during this round from an ape-like archetype. That doesn't mean from the primate kingdom, the primates of the animal kingdom, but from an ape-like archetype, which developed during the previous round, but as a finer, more evolved form. And that it was this etheric archetype that formed the basis for round 4 humanity. Every round, every progressive parallel stage, the round 4 of every chain has its own quality of progression that moves all that is contained within it forward. Next up, these monads, or divine sparks, are thus the lunar ancestors, the Petries themselves. For these lunar spirits have to become men in order that their monads may reach a higher plane of activity and self-consciousness, that is, the plane of the Manasaputras, those who endow the senseless shells created and informed by the Petries with mind in the latter part of the third race. So the first life wave to inhabit a chain, called the lunar Petries, are definitely present in today's humanity, with the specific purpose, HPB here tells us, of subjecting their lower vehicles or shells to the divine influence of the Manasaputris of the fifth kingdom. Of course, that's true of all of us, but they were they set this pattern into motion. Let's take a look at this, an excerpt from the Theosophical Glossary, entry on Manasaputras. Can we get a reader, please?
Janet, can you read that, please? And Veronica, can you read that, please?
Sorry about that.
Manasaputras. Bill, I think the other person you called wants to read.
Go ahead, and we'll get Janet next time. Go ahead, please,
Okay.
Anne Veronica. Thank you.
Manasaputras, Sanskrit, from Manas, mind, plus Putra, son, child, sons of mind. Mind manifesting in the universe is called Mahat, When manifesting in particular entities, it is called manas. Manasa signifies beings who are endowed with the fire of self-consciousness, which enables them to carry on trains of self-conscious thought and meditation. Hence, the Manasaputras are children of cosmic mind, a race of Dhyani Chokans, particularly evolved along the lines of the monastic principle. These semi-divine Manasaputras incarnated in the quasi-senseless, intellectually dormant human race at about the midpoint of the third root race of this fourth round, and by their own spiritual intellect, fire and flame, they quickened the latent mental fires in infant humanity.
Thank you, Veronica.
Thank you.
So DK says, man aims at becoming a divine Manasaputra, or perfected son of mind, showing forth all the powers inherent in mind, and thus becoming like unto his monadic source, a heavenly man. Okay, now we can use that other reader. I didn't catch the name. Can we get, oh, wait a minute. Hang on,
Yeah.
let me finish. Never mind. I'm sorry. I thought we were at a new section. So next up, in the same way, the monads or egos of the men of the seventh round of our earth, after our own globes A, B, C, and D at sequa. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Is it sequa or, but it means in sequence. Parting with their life energy will have informed and thereby called to life other Laya centers destined to live and act on a still higher plane of being. In the same way with the terrene ancestors, will the terrene ancestors create those who will become their superiors? It's a very obtuse statement, but let's give it a shot. Terrene means earth-like. So just as the humanity of the coming seventh round will activate higher planes of consciousness through their own life energy, so will the terrene ancestors, the Petries or form aspect, create a humanity whose level of consciousness will be superior to their own. The term terrene ancestors suggests a correspondence to lunar ancestors. Since the lunar lords initiated this chain, we might surmise that the terrene ancestors will initiate the next or fifth chain, during which time beings superior to those terrene ancestors will gradually develop. Any thoughts or questions about this? Okay, now we can have that reader.
Janet, please.
It now becomes plain that there exists in nature a triple evolutionary scheme for the formation of the three periodical apadas, or rather three separate schemes of evolution, which in our system are
Inextricably.
Good, I'm glad you can say it. Interwoven. I don't know what's the matter with me today. Anyway, and interblended at every moment. These are the monadic or spiritual, the intellectual, and the physical evolutions. These three are the finite aspects or the reflections on the field of cosmic illusion of Atma. The seventh, the one reality. Number one, monadic, is, as the name implies, concerned with the growth and development into still higher phases of activity of the monad in conjunction with two, the intellectual, represented by the Manasa, Diana's solar divas, or the Ashkiwata, Petries, the givers of intelligence and consciousness to man. And three, the physical, represented by the Shishas of the lunar Petries, round which nature has consecrated the present physical body. This body serves as a vehicle for the growth, to use a misleading word, and the transformations through manas, and owing to the accumulation of experiences of the finite into the infinite of the transcendent into the eternal and absolute.
Transient into the eternal and absolute. Thank you. Some difficult terms here. Okay. First, it now becomes plain that there exists in nature a triple evolutionary scheme for the formation of the three periodical upadis, or rather three separate schemes of evolution, which in our system are inextricably interwoven and interblended at every point. These are the monadic or spiritual, the intellectual, and the physical evolutions. In DK theosophy, these upadis are usually described as three principles: the monad, soul, and personality. The monad sends forth the soul aspect, and the soul in turn sends forth the personality aspect, hence the inextricable nature of these. Next, these three are the finite aspects or the reflections on the field of cosmic illusion of Atma, the seventh, the one reality. So the fact that the Atma described here sends forth the three upadis, including the monad, suggests that by the term Atma, HPB is actually referring to the universal self or spirit, more commonly called Param Atman, not the individual Atma, which DK theosophy calls the monad. HPB's second quote unquote finite aspect is called the intellectual. This is technically correct, though the term is usually used in modern theosophy to describe lower mind. And finally, DK theosophists have expanded the third upadi, the physical, to include the threefold lower man, not just the physical body as here suggested. For the most part, these are either differences in semantics or minor shifts in emphasis. Next. 1. The monadic is, as the name implies, concerned with the growth and development into still higher phases of activity of the monad. So at first glance, this seems to be an apt description of the monad as understood by DK theosophists. After all, there are higher phases of activity of the monad through identification with the planetary logos, the source of all monadic life. But since what HPB era theosophists call the monad is in DK theosophy the many she's of the cosmic physical plane, as shown here, it's more likely that by, quote, growth and development into still higher phases of activity of the monad, HPB is referring to a progressive shift in consciousness from lower to higher monads, such as from the lower to higher human monad, shown at right, which is characterized by a shift from lower to higher manas. Different terms, same or at least similar ideas. Next, 2, the intellectual, represented by the Manasa Dhyanis, the Solar Devas, or the Agnishvata Pitris, the givers of intelligence and consciousness to man. This is the second aspect sent forth by Param Atman, or universal self, about which DK wrote a 210-page section in a treatise on cosmic fire. Could we get a reader for an excerpt from that section?
Scott, can you read that for us, please?
We start here upon the consideration of the Agnishvatas, or the fire devas of the mental plane, and are thus launched upon the most stupendous subject in connection with our planetary evolution. It is the one having the most occult significance for man, for these solar angels concern his own essential nature and are also the creative power by which he works. The work of the Agnishvatas, the self-conscious principles, the builders or constructors of the egoic body on the higher mental levels, is to unite the higher three principles, Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, and the three lower, and thus become in very truth the middle principle in man. They themselves originate from the egoic middle principle. Thus, the esoteric seven is completed.
Thank you, Scott. So, and finally for this passage, and that will be the last we do today, the physical represented by the chahayas of the lunar petries, round which nature has concreted the present physical body. This body serves as the vehicle for the growth, to use a misleading word, and the transformations through manas, and owing to the accumulation of experiences of the finite into the infinite, of the transient into the eternal and absolute. Basic theosophy is what we have here. Can we get a reader for this excerpt from the Theosophical Glossary on this unusual term called chahaya? Please.
Okay, first, Anne Veronica says, okay, it seems that they build in a way the Antakarana.
Well, they, through their influence, the personality initiates the process and then is met by the soul to complete that process. Actually, by soul and monad to complete that process. But they don't, the Manasaputras don't do it in and of themselves. It has to be initiated by the indwelling jiva. But yes, we couldn't do it without the agency of soul. Okay, reader, please.
All right, Anne Veronica, can you read that for us, please?
How did you say the first word, Francis?
Chahaya.
Chahaya. A shade, shadow, copy, esoterically the astral image or body of a person. Besides referring to the human astral form, the term is usually applied to the shadows or copies, the astral body, projections, of the spiritual being or Petris who played an important part in the early evolutionary development of humankind. In the first root race, the pure celestial being, Dayan Chohan, and the great Petris of the various classes were commissioned, the one to involve their image, Chahaya, and make of them physical man, the others to inform and thus endow him with divine intelligence and the comprehension of the mysteries of creation.
Thank you, Anne Veronica. And with that, we will we'll close for today, a couple minutes early, because, let's see, where did it go? Anyway, yes, I see a raised hand.
Please go ahead, Gordon.
Yes, in this definition, talking about shadows or copies, the astral body projections. Now, is here astral
No.
body referring to astral, or is this etheric again?
Astral and old school theosophy has a really astrality in general has a very different meaning. It's much more indefinite, and it's also much further reaching. It includes, for instance, the Akashic, which DK theosophy puts on the monadic plane. So I think it's more or less a general term for the substantive source of the physical body. It's not at all defined by the parameters that DK theosophy defines astrality, which is, the emotional body.
Okay.
Okay, and that'll do it for today. Do you want to give dates?
Okay. The next Secret Doctrine is going to be on the 20th of August. And the next
Secret,
CF is going to be on the 28th of July.
right? And then
Okay, my internet is going in and out. I'm sorry. And the next Secret Doctrine is the 20th of August.
right? And then
So a
Secret.
month away.
Right.
Secret Teaching of All Ages is going to be 6 August.
There you go. Yeah. Actually, Secret Doctrine will
But
be 5
the-
weeks. Go ahead.
I can't hear you. I think I got lost.
Okay. You can't hear me now? I guess you can. So,
Okay, are you there, Francis?
yes, I'm here. Does anybody else hear me? If so, speak up.
I
Yep.
can hear you
I hear
now.
both of you. I hear
Yes.
both of you, Francis.
Okay, yeah, I think, yeah, your internet blinked off and back on. Recapitulation, 5 weeks from now for the next Secret Doctrine. That's
I think I'm off.
that's on the 20th of August. 2 weeks from this past Friday for the Treatise on Cosmic Fire. And the first Sunday in August, what did she say? I think it was the 6th for
6 August.
the next Secret Teachings of All Ages. And that'll do it. So thanks so much for being here. I know this is difficult, especially this business about the monad. It's quite challenging philosophically to understand these ideas, but hopefully we got a little closer to it today. So thanks very much. See you next time.
Goodbye,
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.